Good evening.
This is you talking.
Hello, hello.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. Hi there. This is Jim Burrow.
Hi, Jim. Hey, Cheryl, if you can hear me, if you could never mind, got it. Let's see, Mr. Burrow, see you. Mr. Frazier, are you there?
My lovely face doesn't come up on screen. Maybe you can see me. I can't see you guys.
Well, what we typically do is we will, and watch, I'll show that. We typically have the names up, like what you see here.
Gotcha.
And I'll have my video covered up so that way it shows this particular view. And I see Mr. Hotze. So Mr. Hotze, I have promoted you to panelist and you'll need to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
I certainly can.
Thank you.
And Mr. Hotze, FYI, we were having a little bit of trouble with the website, but the PDF just got sent out to everyone. So that is the PDF of the slides that just went out to you and the other members of the task force. Let's see, Mr. Rosenbaum.
Yes, sir.
Good evening. Mr. Roylance.
Yes.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Did you send me a link to that?
No, we actually had to end up sending the file. For some reason, the website was giving us trouble and we kept crashing as we were trying to upload it. But we did just send the PDF of the presentation out to everyone.
Okay, I've got it.
Mayor Friedberg, we see you. Are you there?
Yes, sir.
Great. Mr. Canonico, good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Mr. Gary, I can. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Grant, it looks like you've got Michael Ling on the participants. He needs to be promoted.
Just did that.
Okay, good.
Mr. Ling, we just promoted you, and can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. But I was on mute, so sorry about that.
No problem.
Hey, Michael.
Hey,
Chris.
Chris.
Good.
See, we also have a couple of other attendees there. Dan, I know you can't respond, but hello, sir. And let's
He's been there since 71, so that makes it 30, almost.
Mr. Hotze, I believe
Something like that.
have some background noise there.
Yes, I'm sure I have background. I'm trying to find my. Okay, I'm gonna hit mute now.
Okie doke. Okay. Chavonne.
Yes, sir.
I think we'll go ahead and get started here shortly. Let me take a look. So I think we've covered there. I'm looking at the, let's see. I see ARK engineers on the line. Who's making, are we expecting others to join the call and also present?
Yes, Freese and Nichols. This is James Andrews and Marcus McRae and Stephen Wilcox from Costello's here with us.
Okay, Stephen's with you all there?
He is.
Okay, I can barely hear you, by the way. So
Okay.
we're waiting
We'll just
for.
speak up. Hear me better now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, we'll just speak up.
Okay, so we're waiting for Brian?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, James, you might need to be a little bit closer to the mic during the presentation.
Okay.
Hello, everybody. This is Gus. I just signed in.
Good afternoon, sir.
Thank you. Long time no talk to.
Right. So I see 713 858 8954. I'm sorry. Who's,
Grant, that's me. That's Gus.
oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna rename you. Thought that number looked familiar. Okay, so Brian, see you've joined now.
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, Chavonne, I was going to ask if you don't mind when we formally get started here, if you could just kind of take roll for the 3 liaisons and the members. Do you have that list handy that you're able to do that?
I do not, but I can work on making sure that I do.
Okay.
I do have a list, Brant.
Okay, Cheryl, would you mind then running through that to?
Okay, would you like me to, you want me to do a roll call?
I'm sorry, Chavonne?
I'm about to send you an email, Cheryl, if you can work on helping that person that needs help getting in. and I will do the roll call here. So let me just forward this to Cheryl. And now I will bring up okay, I have that list where I'm able to have everyone check in that's here.
Okay, great. Well, then we will go ahead and formally get started. My name is Brant Gary. I'm the interim city manager with the city of Bel Air. Also on the line from city staff, Ms. Chavonne Sampson, our director of development services, and Ms. Cheryl Bright, who also works in the city manager's office and is our communications officer. So Chavonne, if you wouldn't mind going through the list, and let's see if we can get everyone to acknowledge their presence, and we'll go from there.
All right, Chris Kaneko. Am I muted?
No, I can hear you. Chris, are you able to hear us? He was there earlier, Chavonne.
Okay.
He's not listed at the moment. He may have fallen off.
I see his icon there.
Yeah, he's.
Okay, yeah, we'll come back to him.
All right, Yana Crystal.
Actually, Chavonne, I see her on the attendees list, so I'm going to go ahead and promote.
Oh, here I am. Okay, now it's working.
Okay, Minnie Rosenbaum.
On here.
Winfred Frazier.
He was there earlier. I'm not sure if maybe he's muted on his own phone or not. I believe that okay, Chris, I see your box lit up. Are you there?
All right, I'll keep going and we can always come back. Michael Ling.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you much, sir. Robin Rosenblatt. James Brower.
I am here. Thank you.
Millie Hass.
I'm here.
Thank you much. Jonathan Rychek.
I'm here.
Thank you much, sir. And David Rolance. Okay, and Mayor Freeberg.
Yes, I'm here, and I think several of the names you've called, you can see on Zoom that they're muted.
Can you hear me, Chavonne? This is Wayne Frazier.
Okay, now we can. Thank you much.
Yeah,
Okay.
David Roy Lance is now unmuted as well.
Yeah, David Roy Lance is present.
Thank you much. Mayor Pro Tem Pappas.
I am here. Thank you.
And Councilmember Holtze.
Present.
Thank you much.
Thank you, Chavonne. So once again, thank you for your participation this evening. I want to welcome you all to this meeting of the Flood Hazard Mitigation Task Force. This task force was formed back in 2019 via City Council action with the intent of gathering public feedback and some expertise on flood concerns as they specifically relate to Bel Air. This is also a major part of our efforts regarding our community rating system of the National Flood Insurance Program. And so this is obviously something that has quite a bit of impact that we see in our insurance. And we also look at as guidance for what our possibilities are for the future relative to flood mitigation. With that in mind, Chavonne, I'm going to turn it over to you for the flood mitigation plan review.
Thank you much. I am going to make sure that I have the right document up. And I'm able to, if you can give me permission to share my screen. Good evening. So before I get into my presentation, what I have up on the screen will look familiar to many of you guys that have taken part in these meetings in the past. I just kind of want to take a little bit of time before I get into the update to kind of bring us all back together. It's been a little while since we've met. And so as Brent has stated, in 2018, the City of Bel Air Flood Hazard Mitigation Plan was adopted by the City Council. Prior to that, you guys had a series of meetings over months, and during that time, we looked at flooding specifically to the City of Bel Air. We looked at the hazards, we looked at mitigation efforts that we can do here in the City of Bel Air when it comes to flooding. And we looked at that on many different ways. And the first way we looked at that was on a regional basis. Another way that we looked at that is what can we do on a regulatory basis? And lastly, we looked at how can we look at flooding that takes place in the City of Bel Air on a local level. And so once we ended, there were about 23 activities that we had come across. And in that, at the end of that report was a matrix of here's what we saw as the hazard, here are common occurrences and the problem with that hazard. Here are strategies that we think we should do as a community to mitigate. And then lastly, at the end was, okay, so what are the action steps we're going to take in order to implement those mitigation strategies? And so here is a short list to that. In that document, it folds out as a trifold, and it's not really easy to read on the screen there. And so in your flood hazard mitigation plan miniature book that we've supplied for you guys, this action matrix guide was in there. And so I'm not going to go over all of the activities and that's on the list tonight. I'm just here to give you an update. And so here I have the list, and I've highlighted those activities that I want to give you the updated on. And so the purpose of the Flood Hazard Task Force is to keep, and why we meet in March and in August twice a year, is to review these activities. And if at any point we feel that we need to add an activity or we need to take an activity away, that's what the task force is one of their main functions, is to have these discussions and to make those recommendations. As well as if there's, when there's updates that have taken place, like there could have been, and I'm going to get into that in a few minutes here, where we've taken things to the Building and Standards Commission to have them pass the regulatory sections on that. And now this, I get to use this time frame to update you on those happening so that you can see the progress that we're making on those activities. Now, I report on these activities annually to FEMA or to the National Flood Insurance Program to say, these are the activities that we've decided to do as a community, and this is where we are with them. And in that, I also report on how I've met with you guys for us to discuss it. And so at that time, if I need to update it or remove something or change the time frame on something, I'm able to do that during that time. And so tonight, as I go over the update, I'd ask for you guys to, give me any input that you choose to. So if I state something and you're like, oh, well, we don't think that should be on the list anymore, let's have those discussions. Or let's say after public comment, someone says something that we feel that's something that should be added to the list. Let's have that discussion. And then what happens is once you guys come to consensus on that's something that we do want to add, take away, or change, or whatever, or just, leave it be, that's always an option as well. Then I will form a recommendation to submit to City Council so that they can choose to amend the current flood hazard mitigation plan. And so my hope is that many of us spent many months together and, figuring out and really listening to James from ARK Engineer explain to us how flooding works in Bel Air, and that I hope that we've got it right the first time. But again, by chance, as we get more information, as things change, more different regulations come through, of course, there may be a need for us to make those changes. And that's why we meet on twice a year. So let me get right into that. So here, an activity that I want to talk about is updating the city ordinances to clearly define development guidelines for structures in designated flood areas as defined by current special hazard flood area maps, reviewed updated city codes based on the recommended changes of the special flood hazard area map. And so in 2019, we did go through and we did some Chapter 9 updates. And part of that was adding in the how do we administer flood permits. And we put in a whole different section. And I believe probably a few meetings back, I went over that and updated you on that. Well, now what we're finding is people are being creative in how they are mitigating and building in the community, and there's new ways and new innovations are coming out in how things are happening. And so I kept this highlighted because this is an ongoing effort that's taking place. And so you'll see different things that'll come out of, I believe this year, that will come out of the Building and Standards Commission that will be, they will make recommendations to the City Council, as well as it could be some things coming out of the Planning and Zoning Commission. And so as these things develop, I'll be sure to add this in and update you guys on future meetings. And so the next activity is ensure adequate city resources in place to assist residents when applying for buyout and elevation grants. And so we, even in our discussions, we've talked about how buyouts for the city of Bel Air right now may not be the best option, but we have kept on the front line home elevation and applying for home elevation grants. As I've reported to City Council, and I can't remember whether or not I was able to report to this group, the HMGP, the hazard mitigation grant that we had for home elevations, it was not selected as a project. As of now, it's on the alternate list. That means as the money is allocated to other projects, if by chance there's dollars left overs, or if there's by chance someone doesn't spend their allocation for whatever reason, they choose not to, and they're looking for other projects, ours is on the alternate list where it could get selected. And that's for the 2017 Harvey HMGP grant dollars. And so what also that application does as being an alternate is and I'm not speaking this, Lord knows I'm not, but in the future, should other events take place and they're looking for projects, that one is already there sitting and waiting and ready. And so that's up on the list there. The next activity is develop Bel Air special commercial drainage requirements. I alluded to earlier that there's some recommendations that will come from the Building and Standards Commission. This is one of them. At the next meeting, they will be discussing how to incorporate. Currently now we use the City of Houston commercial drainage requirements. And so they will be reviewing that. They've had a few meetings with the Building and Standards Commission where they've discussed these regulations, and now they will have another conversation about that and then send that recommendation to the City Council. The next activity that I want to give you guys an update on is evaluate updates to the building code, which would allow residents to take proactive mitigation efforts on their property. And this is another one of those conversations and discussions that have taken place at both Building and Standards and at the Planning and Zoning meetings to say, where do we as a community, do we stand when it comes to regulations, when it comes to home construction and things of that nature, but making sure that both boards and commission has been very mindful of making sure that protective mitigation efforts are at the forefront. The next activity that I'd like to talk about is under the emergency services activities, properly budget for rescue-oriented persons to make logical purchases to rescue equipment. If you happen to drive by City Hall on last Wednesday, you would have seen that the police department just purchased a new high water vehicle. I think it's I can't remember what Chief Lopez had named it, but they have a name for it now. And so that is along with another high water vehicle that we have and boats and things of that nature. So since Harvey, there has been purchases to make sure that should a flood event take place, that the proper equipment and things are in place. And so that, like I said, is in progress. That part is something that they've accomplished. And as far as the citizen rescues and becoming the citizen emergency rescue team, that's something in the works. And I hopefully have more of an update on that on our next meeting. So now we get into the structural projects, and the one that I want to give you guys an update on tonight is evaluate increasing the size of existing stormwater drainage culverts in Bel Air while continuing to utilize drainage impact when selecting roads to be constructed. Lower street levels when streets are under construction. Strategically locate undergoing storage pipes within the existing street right-of-way to store the 100-year localized rainfall events. And so this is something that kind of is going to tie into the next activity that I'm going to read about. But this is something that we need to, as the Flood Hazard Task Force, make sure that this is still the route that we're looking to go. Tonight, we're going to talk about the master drainage plan and some of the information that we're going to get from there. And so listen to that presentation and tie that back to here to see are the two coincide and are they working out. Next is include design and installation of backflow prevention systems in the upcoming bonds for Bel Air. In this particular one, this is the Flatgate project, and we have submitted a HMGP, that's hazard mitigation grant, for the Harvey event for these. I would say 2 weeks ago, I had my last, hopefully I'm crossing my fingers, my last RFI for that, and that's request of information. And so it was something based as just some documents that we submitted initially, but for whatever reason, I guess with transferring between different reviewers, I needed to resubmit. And so with that being done, we're waiting to hear back on whether or not that is a accepted application or not. The next one that's undergoing is create a protective approach to repair and maintain drainage systems in desirable development areas and neighborhoods with storm drainage systems. Develop a schedule to perform routine maintenance, inspections, and repairs to stormwater infrastructure. Expedite a plan to repair and replace the highly critical local drainage systems in the current bonds for Bel Air 2016. Reevaluate the priorities annually and aggressively pursue future bond programs. And so if you have been paying attention to the current budget cycle, these are conversations that they're having now. And so tonight, if you so choose to have discussions on, is this still accurate? Is this still the direction and the recommendation that you guys would like to give the city council? Now it would be the time to say that, because we're at a good place in the budget cycle. Next is, and I believe this is my last one, is evaluate the conversion of Bel Air wastewater treatment plant and the dog park and soccer field along Edith into detention areas. Evaluate conversion of the trash, conversion of the trash transfer station at Beltway 8 and reservoir for Gray's Bayou. That was a mouthful. And so there's some new grant opportunities that have come about that we get a chance to evaluate to see if this is a good project for those dollars. That is the CDBG MIT grant program. We have a presentation before City Council coming up here in September. And so we're looking into that. So this is always, it felt really good when I was updating this sheet to be able to say in progress, because this is something that was actually on the activity, the action steps for the Flood Hazard Task Force. And so this is tied into that same one, is evaluate the transfer of wastewater treatment for the city of Bel Air, Houston facility, including hazard mitigation funding opportunities. And that's exactly what we're preparing for and getting ready for that grant application, which will be due sometime in October. And so that concludes my update of this. If after I've went over the highlights, and I've highlighted those that are actually we're working on, and I can actually give you an update on. If I did not talk about it today, that means it's on the list. We will, like you said, we have 5 years to work on all these projects, and some of these projects are depending on funding. Some of these projects are dependent on something else that's happening in the day-to-day operations. And so once that takes place, then we can start tackling these other activities. And so that concludes. If you guys have any questions, I'm here to answer them. This is not just coming from Chavonne in Development Services, but this is a staff effort. And so we have staff members from the fire department, police department, parks, finance, just about someone from every department that sits in and helps with making sure that the activities on this list are taking place. Thank you. I'll turn it over to you, Brandon, if there's any questions.
Thank you, Chavonne. Let me pause at this point and see if there are any members of the task force that would like to ask any questions.
Well, I have one. Brant?
Yes, Ms. Hass, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a while since I've seen this document, Chavonne, and it has changed somewhat. Would you mind sending me, you mentioned a booklet that you had or something that was updated. May I have a copy of that, please?
The booklet hasn't been updated. it's just this sheet is what was updated when, so there could have been an activity, the last time we met her, that was in progress, where that may not be in progress now, or it could be completed. And so now today I updated to those projects that we are actively right now working on. So yes, I can make sure that we send out this updated copy to the task force, so that you
Okay,
can
thanks.
insert it into your booklet.
I don't have a booklet.
Okay, I can see about getting you a new one. It was a thin book, and it had like a mint green cover to it that said Flood Hazard Task Force. Instead of printing out the big large book, we made a modified version for each task force member. But we have we have a new member, and I want to make sure.
I don't think I've seen. Yeah.
Okay,
I
fair
don't
enough.
think I've seen that.
Okay, I will make sure you get a copy.
Thank you.
Chavonne, this is Win Frazier. Just one quick question as a follow-up to your presentation. And first of all, thank you for the presentation. You mentioned there's some current updates to the building code, which will allow residents to take proactive mitigation efforts on their property. And I'm not asking for the whole code, but to highlight a couple of those things that may be in the works that the residents can do at this point under the building code or within the building code.
All right, that for the most part, as of now, was answering the question of if my house floods, will I be able to remodel? And how often will I be able to remodel? And so and are we as a community going to have the communicative approach to how we look at flood permits? And what was passed in 2019 was no, if your home has flooded one time and you need to remodel after that, it's not cumulative. We don't go in and add in those permits. We don't start paying attention to how much those repairs are costing until you have flooded twice. And that is only over a 10-year period of time. And so I think you guys will remember the presentation that I gave you guys regarding that. I believe the slides were boxes, and that had like green, red, and yellow to kind of understand and go through the process of when you would be able to get a flood permit and when you wouldn't be able to, and when you would be able to get a remodel permit and when you wouldn't.
Thanks, Chavonne. I do remember that. I was just curious if there was something else since our last meeting. Yeah, you did cover that in detail. I was just wondering if there's any other things. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chavonne. Thank you, Ms. Hast and Mr. Frazier. Are there any other comments or questions for Chavonne?
This is Yana Cristal. I had one more question. So Chavonne, you had mentioned some of these activities are being funded through federal grants and other are being funded by the 2016 bond program. How is it decided which activities are being funded by I'll call them the LAIR funds, and which activities are being funded by federal dollars?
All right. Well, it'll be easier for me to tell you those projects that are being
Pardon me,
funded.
Chavonne, you broke up there just for a second.
Okay. It'll be easier for me to tell you those projects that are funded through either HMGP or the CDBG dollars. And so the remaining 2016 streets projects, I believe that's like Cynthia, Mimosa, there's about 5 streets, Chelsea. Those streets will be funded through either the 2015 or the 2017 CDBG project. And so those other ones, like the flap gates or the home elevation, those were through HMGP projects. We also apply for the flood mitigation assistance grants for home elevations as well. We haven't been successful with those, but again, every year we will apply for those, and hopefully our projects get selected. And so for the most part, what's remaining is either used, either CBG funds are being used, or we're pending the approval of applications. And a lot of those projects, and I'll use, let's say, the Felt Park generators, for instance. Some of those projects, or a lot of those projects, come from the CIP. So if by chance we don't get funding, there is, then the CIP could kick in and fund those projects. But that again is happens and gets hashed out during the budget process. And so that would then be approved during that time. And as you may or may not know, we do review the CIP during the budget process every year.
Thanks. I tried to keep up with the acronyms.
I'm sorry. I will do better with that. I will do better with that.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I'll make one last call for additional comments or questions on this item. And so at this point, we will move on to our next item. But before we do, I do want to mention a couple of things. I believe I erroneously mentioned 2019 earlier. This task force actually was started via resolution in October of 2017. Also, I want to point out that typically this is the type of meeting that we would broadcast via Facebook Live. Unfortunately, Facebook Live is not available this evening due to some technical issues on the Facebook side. So we will be posting the video of this virtual meeting, as well as the slides and any other documents on the task force website. And we'll be sending that link out here a little bit later on this evening. And one last item I wanted to mention, we talked, or it was mentioned earlier, about some of the high water vehicles that the city has. Both of those vehicles that were referred to were actually funded by the Bel Air Police and Fire Foundation. And we certainly want to thank them for that, but I did want to give credit where credit is due. And with that, we'll move on to item C, the Harris County mandate of new flood regulations regarding the 500-year base flood elevation plus 2 feet. Chavonne, all you. Chavonne, you're still muted, by the way.
I was asking permission to share my screen, please.
Okay. 1 second.
Not a problem. Now, if I can have a second. Okay, so on May 22nd, a letter was sent out to all of Harris County cities and other entities, regulatory entities. In this, they are basically asking the city of Bel Air or all the cities in the Harris County area to adopt the 500-year standard with under the new system here. And I'm gonna call James up to help me out with this. But before I get into that, the biggest part that what I want to talk about is how the city is
I'm
addressing
sorry,
this.
but you're breaking up a whole lot.
Okay, is this better? Hello?
I think that's a little better, Siobhan.
Okay.
Yeah.
so-
I missed a whole lot of what you said.
Okay, I'll start over. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to ask James to come up, and he's going to speak on what exactly is the Alice 400 and what does that mean and what are they asking for. I'm going to, before he come up, I'm going to tell you what the city is doing, our next steps. And so the letter is saying that we need to adopt the 500-year regulation. And we have until December 31st to do such. And so at the next Building and Standards meeting, their September meeting, they will be reviewing this. They will have some special guests come out if it fits into their schedule. They were supposed to come out the August meeting, but with the preparation for possible hurricane, that got delayed. So we're hoping that they'll come out for that next meeting. I'll be sure to send out an invite to the task force if they want to listen in on those special guests that'll be coming out to talk about where did this come from as far as the county and what they're looking for. And so that will give the Building and Standards Commission some foundational information as they look at what recommendations to Chapter 9 they will be making to the City Council. And what staff will be doing in tandem with ARK Engineering's help is working with them to get possible language for the update of the Chapter 29. And the reason why this is important is that the letter states that if you have a choice, you could adopt this or you don't have to. If you don't adopt this, then future grant funding could be at stake. Future partnerships with Harris County and the funds that they get could be at stake. And so I would like to turn it over to James if he could help me out here and explain this a lot more better than I can.
All right, Chavonne. This is James Andrews with ARK Engineers, and thank you, Chavonne. The city has changed their requirements for setting finished floor elevations over the years based on flood data that becomes available. The current requirement is for the finished floors of new homes to be at the effective 100-year base flood elevation plus 1 foot. And what the county is suggesting is to build the finished floor to the 500-year elevation, which is in general is about a 1.5 to 2 feet above the 100-year elevation. So if the city decided to adopt the county's policy of building finished floors to the 500-year flood elevation, that would effectively push finished floors about 1/2 foot or 1 foot above the current minimum requirement. So to reiterate, we currently go by the 100-year base flood elevation plus 1 foot. And so that is generally a foot to 2 feet below the 500-year. So going up from the 100-year to the 500-year is half that much. So 1/2 foot or 1 foot higher. Hopefully that explains what the direct language from the county is to require the minimum finished floor elevation of new habitable structures be established at or waterproof to the 500-year flood elevation as shown on the effective flood insurance study. So any questions about that?
How will that, James, this is Millie, how will that affect the 50% rule?
All right. You want me to answer that?
Yes, I would appreciate it.
Okay. So the 50% rule will remain the same. This kind of is at this stage of the game, it's when this is about building. When you build a new structure, this is the regulation you have to build to. What you're asking is
but
if go ahead.
I'm asking about the existing houses because most of them are not built to the 500-year floodplain standard. They're built to the 100-year floodplain standard for the base flood elevation. So that would put a lot more houses below the base flood elevation.
So
and then if they go to remodel or if they're flooded, then the 50% rule will kick in where it wouldn't have kicked in if it under the 100-year floodplain rule.
So this is we will take those things in consideration, but what this regulation is doing now, this is, and James, please correct me if I'm wrong, this is the regulating what you build. So these are new constructions that come in. This is what they'll have to follow. What you're saying is this hasn't changed the flood maps yet. We won't have those conversations for another year to 2 years when Harris County, as they're working with us, I think the last meeting I had was back in March about where we are in the process of updating flood maps. And so once a new flood map is adopted, and if this is what's being used to establish the new BFE, this is no different than when we adopted a new flood map in 2007. And so whatever those regulations are, and we talked about that when we had discussions about what about the 50% rule. And that's why we made concessions, for lack of a better term, to say that you don't have to worry about remodeling until you have the 2 floods. And with this, whether you're under the 100 or under the 200, if you don't have an elevated home, you're bound by that 50% rule anyway. And then let's say you have a new structure that was built, let's say in 2020, most of those, we would hope that they built the 1 foot above, and we can start having different conversations to say, what do we do when, and let's say this, we adopt new flood maps in 2022. That's a different conversation that we'll have to have is, what do we do with those properties that built under the 2007 standard versus 2022? And so until we know what that is, that conversation is a bit premature. So James, let me know if I'm wrong in saying that this is about the Build 2 regulation.
You're correct.
So Chavonne, this is Mayor Friedberg real quick. If it helps in addressing Millie's question, because this is a question that I actually get a lot because people understandably find it confusing. The 50% rule is saying that in the event you are substantially damaged, it's a question of whether you're grandfathered under the old rules, or when you exceed 50%, you are no longer grandfathered and you are now held to the current standard as of the time of the event. So the 50% rule is not changed at all. Right. To answer Millie's question, as I understand it, were the city to adopt the 500-year base flood elevation, all it would do is change the extent to which someone substantially damaged would be required to elevate. Either way, they're going to be required to elevate, whether to the now current standard or the future current standard.
Yes.
Hey, Mayor and Brand, one comment from Chris. I think one of the backgrounds on this is because of the Atlas 14 rainfall increases. They're waiting and trying to get the new 500-year set now as across the board in the county. And then once the Atlas 14 determines what the new 100-year BFEs will be, they will, I think, go back and reallow back to the 100-year once those new elevations set, which indubitably will be close to where the 500-year is right now.
So the reason why we are bringing this to the task force is one, we want to make sure you guys are mindful of what regulation changes are taking place so that questions, just like Millie has brought to our attention, we can start thinking about those. And then two is the task force was created to be able to really have a magnifying glass and really focus in on flooding issues and regulations that are coming to the community.
Can't hear you.
That are coming to the community so that they can support the Building and Standards Commission and giving them feedback once they've, thought about these things. So that is a wonderful thing to be able to have the Flood Hazard Task Force whose main focus function is to consider flooding and flooding mitigation efforts and regulations in the city. And then they, by their conversation that they can have, then that allows Building and Standards, who has somewhat of a bigger scope to look at building regulations in the city as a whole. They can lean on the task force to kind of help give recommendations. And then once the Flood Hazard Task Force, they have their recommendation, they have their discussions, Building and Standards take those in considerations, but then they come up with their own. And then once staff takes it to City Council, the staff is able to give the City Council, this is what the Flood Hazard Task Force had to say about this. This is what the Building and Standards is recommending. And so they have a lot more of public feedback in the direction that they can take when it comes to regulations. And so I just wanted to take us a moment in time to kind of connect the dots. Why am I bringing this up to you guys, and what will happen next?
Thank you, Chavonne. I'll open the floor up for any additional questions or comments on this item.
Maybe Chavonne, if you can, or James, or whomever wants to chime in, can you walk us through just a quick, so we're all on the same page, kind of thoughts or cost benefit analysis of participating in this new standard versus not participating?
I can answer that.
Okay.
So the overall and bottom line is missing out on the opportunity of future grant applications and future projects, partnerships and projects, and really and hopefully you guys can still hear me. You'll see in the activities, the Flood Hazard Task Force has said that one of the main objectives, or one of the main things that we need to do, is partner with other places, City of Houston, flood control, whoever is have a project or they're doing flood mitigation. We want to connect with them, and so this could jeopardize us having those opportunities because this is really a way that the regulatory realm is going, I'm saying, like on the people level and now on the Harris County level, is they are really connecting or having the two be integrated in. Do you have regulations in place to mitigate structures from getting flooded? And if you have those mitigation or those regulations in place, then you are a viable candidate to get dollars to continue to mitigate it. But if you are not working to, build more resilient homes in your community, then it doesn't make sense for us to give you grant dollars to do such. And so that's, to me, the off the top of my head is what I can come with is the value or the cost benefit to this. James, feel free to chime in another way that I may not be thinking about right now.
James, do you mind repeating the average difference between the 100-year to the 500-year?
It's approximately 1.5 to 2 feet across Bel Air.
Okay, so the homes that we are building currently, because of the Bel Air requirement, we are already in most areas building them to 2 and sometimes even 3 feet above the 1 foot of base flood elevation due to the requirement of the crawl space itself.
And
So
that would certainly be above the effective 500-year floodplain.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to affect us too much on the level of the homes that we are already building.
Okay, good. I was concerned about that just from a cost perspective, and then the home sitting longer in the market. Okay, good.
Yeah, you know, a lot of the homes we're building are about the 1 foot or so below base flood elevation. So that means the home have to be raised minimum of 3 feet, and we are there. In order for us to meet the requirement for space under the house and based on flood vents, sizing, we are almost automatically are at least 2 or 3 feet. As you know, I'm a builder, and most of the homes I'm building, and I've been building since the 100 years, are at least 2 or 3 feet above 1 foot of base flood elevation.
Thank you for that.
So James, question here. This is Michael Lin. Is the 500-year floodplain based on the completion of the project brace, or is under the current project brace status? I guess my question is the completion of a project brace is going to have any impact on the 5-year plan?
This is James Andrews again. Yeah, that's a good question. We're kind of in a changing time right now, in that the effective flood rate, the effective flood elevation is what's on the maps today, and does not include project breaks.
Okay.
And so it's kind of a, you're going to see if they did remap the floodplain based on project Braze, which they, you know, I'm not sure if they're going to do that or not, because what that would do would lower the 500-year, but then you bring in the new Atlas 14 flow rates, flow volumes, and that would push it back up again. So,
okay,
you know, it's good for us to use the effective rates as they're shown on the FEMA maps today.
okay, all right, thanks.
Okay, so I will assume that we have no additional comments or questions on this item, and I will go ahead and bring back up the main agenda slides. Okay. And the next item on our agenda for this evening is a presentation concerning the Master Drainage Concept Plan. That will be introduced by Mr. Mike Leach, our Director of Public Works, and will include Mr. James Andrews, our City Engineer, as well as other members of the project team. So Mike, I will defer to you to introduce this item, and I will go ahead and bring up the presentation, and I can tab through if you just want to cue me once we get to that point. So Mike?
That sounds perfect. Thank you, Brant. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thanks very much. Well, good evening, everyone. This is an exciting time for us. We're here to review with you the results so far of the Master Drainage Concept Plan. So I'm going to steal a little bit of the thunder for the first few slides here, but not too much. So as you may know, one of our objectives, and as Chavonne mentioned earlier, was to work interlocally, work with our partners. As you know, drainage does not have any respect for jurisdictional boundaries. So when we were scoping this project, we thought it best to work with a couple of partners that are really instrumental in how our drainage actually operates in this area. So one of them is TxDOT. TxDOT is a participant in this study. As you know, Bel Air is bisected by 610. 610 is a relatively old freeway with less than contemporary standards for drainage infrastructure. So it was good of them to hop on this study and financially participate. Harris County Flood Control is also a partner in this study. They are financially participating as well. When we have meetings at the staff level to go through this, there are engineers and representatives from all of the entities present. So this is not just a project whereby a Bel Air consultant does the work and then we hand it over to those two entities. No, this is a full partnering effort. So far, so good. The City of Houston is also a partner, though they didn't participate financially. We're working with them, and I think we've mentioned it to this board before, or task force, I should say, that we're working with them on the Chimney Rock corridor. They had a project going there to evaluate how to make improvements to, I believe it's called the Richmond Plaza subdivision area. They realized pretty quickly, as one does, that it's difficult to make improvements without impacting folks downstream. So they came to us and we were happy to partner with them. So that work dovetailed nicely into this. So those are the 4 partners that are at the table for this study. So I'm going to pass it off to James Andrews at this point and ask him to walk you through what has been accomplished to date. And then we're going to conclude with what are our next steps. So with that, Brant, can I trouble you to transfer it over to James, please?
Brant, are you going to change the
Yes,
slide?
sir. If you just give me a next, I'll tab along.
Well, first, could you start it? There you go. All right, thank you very much. This is James Andrews. Tonight we will provide, as Mike, actually, not that, we're okay. We'll provide an update on the City of Bel Air's Master Drainage Concept Plan. The Bel Air Flood Mitigation Task Force may recall that your report to City Council included many recommendations, as Chavonne's already gone through, but it also included this particular study to be conducted with other stakeholders to address potential regional drainage improvements. And as Mike said, that, you know, as you know, flooding is not confined to political boundaries, and we've all got to work together to try to solve this big problem. After we make this presentation, we'd certainly like to hear from the task force members that pose questions to us, and we'd like to try to answer those. And then we also, the public is also able to submit questions. We've got a website that we'll give you the address to shortly, that they can post their questions about the concept plan, and we'll answer them after the meeting. All right, this basically shows the partnerships, and as Mike said, it's the City of Bel Air, TxDOT, and the Harris County Flood Control. They have agreed by interlocal agreements to conduct the Bel Air Master Drainage Concept Plan. The plan will analyze the capacity of existing major drainage systems which serve the City of Bel Air and the surrounding area. We will provide recommended improvements to these systems to prevent structural flooding in storm events up to and including the 100-year 24-hour storm event. We'll also determine benefits these systems may provide during more extreme storm events. The consulting engineer project team consists of ARKK engineers, Costello, and Fries and Nichols. And of course, the Harris County Flood Control District, TxDOT, and the City of Bel Air are playing major roles in developing any potential concept improvements. Next slide, please. Generally, the scope of work of the concept plan is as follows. We're determine drainage improvements for 10 through the 100-year storm events using Atlas 14 probabilities of rainfall volumes. Determine 3 concepts for improvements with possible phasing. Evaluate open channels, storm sewer, detention ponds, and flood tunnels, which we'll go through tonight. determine estimated mitigation volumes to mitigate peak flows along Brays Bayou, review and analyze potential overflows coming into the city, as we talked to the task force about previously. And as we mentioned, we've also developed a website for the purpose to inform all about our progress and answer questions about the project itself. And you can see the website on this at the bottom of this slide. Next slide, please. Bel Air has flooded from various severe storms over the last century. Various degrees of flooding have really plagued the city and for that matter, Southeast Texas for decades. And even before Hurricane Harvey, there were several severe storms that produced flooding in the area. And as we have in the past, there's many contributing factors for flooding in the Bel Air area. Some of these are the just very high average annual rainfall of about 50 inches, the flat tabletop topography of the area. There's about 5 feet of fall or from the north side to the south side of Bel Air. Clay soils that don't absorb water very well, the proximity to Brays Bayou. Stormwater from the city of Houston flows through Bel Air from the north and from the west that we'll talk about in more detail. Stormwater runoff from Bel Air drains into undersized systems that are owned by others. And as Chavonne had mentioned, that there are below base flood finished floor elevations of homes that were constructed prior to national flood insurance rate standards. And then lastly, we have as areas of Bel Air were developed, neighborhoods didn't have a drainage master plan, so there was no real sheet flow analysis performed for the area as these subdivisions were built. There are generally two types of flooding conditions that occur in the Bel Air area. One is a shallow floodplain flood. That's when the capacity of Brays Bayou is exceeded, and flooding occurs as stormwater overtops the banks of the bayou and spreads through the low-lying floodplain areas. And the other type of flooding condition that the Bel Air area can experience is when we just have a very high intensity local rainfall that exceeds the storm sewer capacity, and it ponds in the streets and floods the street. In some cases, it floods the structures at low elevations. It's kind of like a simplification of that is it's kind of like a bathtub flood. You think of your bathtub filling up faster than it is able to drain out. This type of flood is not identified on the flood insurance rate maps, and is again one more reason why everyone in Southeast Texas should have flood insurance. And then there's, of course, the combination of both types, and that is when Brays is out of its banks and then Bel Air gets hit with a very intense, heavy local rainfall. Next slide, please. Tropical Storm Allison and Hurricane Harvey are two storms where those two conditions occurred. A review of the Tropical Storm Allison flood event documentation showed approximately 1,432 homes were flooded in Bel Air, and over 1,000 of those homes were located east of 610. We're also showing on this particular exhibit data collected from the May 2015 Memorial Day flood, where 220 structures were flooded. Next slide, please. This shows one of the problems during that May 2015 storm. The service road of 610 was flooded, and it made it impossible for emergency vehicles to cross 610. Next slide, please. This chart shows local rainfall numbers at a rainfall gauge at Brays Bayou and Stella Link, and it shows, you focus in on the May 2015 Memorial Day storm versus Allison. It shows, Allison having, higher intensity rainfall. Next slide, please. And then, of course, we've got to look at Hurricane Harvey. It was the big one. Next slide, please. The 4-day peak rainfall frequency during Harvey was was just absolutely unbelievable. You can see from this Harris County Flood Control District exhibit, the exceedance probability in the Bel Air area, as well as much of Harris County, was over a 5,000 year event. Next slide, please. And also, the recorded flood levels were higher than ever recorded on these areas of the bios in Harris County marked in orange. So combined with the high intensity rainfalls and the high bio elevation, flooded elevations was a nightmare scenario. Grace Bio in the Bella area was out of its banks for a very long period of time, almost 2 days, and the local rainfall volumes were incredible. Next slide, please. In Bel Air alone, over 1,900 structures flooded in Harvey, and that does not include garages, which are generally lower than the house finished floors. What this chart does show is, if you look in the August 2017 flood, which is Harvey, that out of the 1,936 homes that flooded, only 47 of those were ones that were built to the current standard for elevation. Next slide, please. Overall, Hurricane Harvey flooded approximately 2,318 structures, including garages. And the areas where the most structures flooded were located in the southeast quadrant of the city, followed by the south central quadrant of the city. Both of these areas, of course, very close to Grace Bio. Next slide, please. There are about 10 major drainage systems that collect stormwater flowing into and within the city of Bel Air. 2 systems flow directly to Grace Bio, and the others flow to Cypress Ditch, that is south of the city of Bel Air and actually located in the city of Houston. And there are 2 systems on the east side of the city that flow to Kilmarnock Ditch, which is owned by the city of West University Place. Next slide, please. We covered this in Chavonne's report about the regulatory requirements for finished floors, of course, being higher than the original home sites. Next slide, please. The city Bel Air's 2016 drainage study and subsequent bond program recommended the critical need to partner with the Harris County Flood Control District and TxDOT to determine feasible solutions to improve the capacity of the large drainage systems to efficiently transport stormwater to Grace Bio. Another key recommendation of the 2000 study was to enlarge the local drainage systems to store or detain floodwaters underground where practical. And this would provide relief to local streets during local extreme event storms by reducing the height of the floodwaters, helping reduce structural flooding. And we feel like this is very important to continue this local program because the existing drainage systems are undersized, and in many cases there is no underground drainage system for the streets. And these new systems will provide even more benefit once they are connected to any improvements that are made to the major arterials that are going north-south, as we showed on that previous exhibit. Next slide, please. The city has also been able to partner with TxDOT on 2 occasions to improve drainage along 610. In the early 2000s, TxDOT and the city constructed an additional 10 by 10 box from Cypress Ditch up to about Cedar Street. And then more recently, we partnered with TxDOT as part of the current interchange project to improve the system from Glenmont to Terminal Street. And at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Stephen Wilcox to kind of go through the details of our concept plan.
Good evening, Task Force. My name is Stephen Wilcox with Costello Engineering, those of you that don't know me. So we're going to walk through kind of the analysis that has been completed to date and some preliminary results and for your consideration. So the first slide here, what you have is you have the overall watershed of Brays Bayou. If you see the red hatched area kind of there in the middle, that's the city limits. the upstream of you, Brays Bayou has about 53,000 acres, kind of compared to your 2,300 acres. So it's a very large watershed. It's highly developed. Gets up, the upper end of it gets into Fort Bend County, and all that water comes back through y'all, right there across through Rice and where your Cypress Ditch ties into it. So next slide, please. So as James mentioned, your main drainage ditch for the city is Cypress Ditch, which is a west to east running ditch on the south side of the city limits. What you're seeing there is what we call a subbasin, which is essentially a division of that watershed that identifies the amount of water that drains to a certain point, in this case, Cypress Ditch. Also, that D115, you'll see that is Harris County Flood Control's designation for this subbasin. Cypress Ditch serves, during normal conditions, approximately 77% of the city limits, the remaining being in the Chimney Rock system, a little bit in the Renwick, and then the Kilmarnock Ditch, as James previously mentioned. Next slide, please. So then further subdivided, you have your north-south drainage systems that just kind of get you in, the right spot in the world here. The light blue on the east side is your Newcastle drainage boundary. And when we say drainage boundary, again, that's the land based on the topography that drains to a certain point. So under normal conditions, you're going to see water that falls in that blue area will drain through the Newcastle system. Similarly, for the green in the middle is the 610, and that'll get into those pipes that James was discussing going down the 610 frontage road. And then you have the Rice system, and then you have Chimney Rock in purple and Renwick in the light yellow. So those are generally your north-south systems that provide the major drainage infrastructure for the city limits. Next slide, please. So when I was saying those drainage boundaries operate under normal conditions, when you have a large rain event similar to T-SARP or Harvey, what happens is that water tends to not obey those boundaries, and it will follow what the natural topography was before whatever the man-made system was that was created. So as you see here, what you're seeing is a heat map of the LIDAR, which is detailed topographic elevations across. We have it across all of Harris County, the whole Gulf Coast region. This is pretty detailed information, and what it's telling you is that when you see those whites on your left side, that is a higher elevation than the yellows and greens you see on the right side. So if you follow that colorization, you can see generally that land is following west to east. And then over the years, we have built man-made systems that go north to south to try to collect that water and take it down to Brays. The issue is when you have the big events and that the north-south system doesn't have capacity anymore, that water will overflow or sheet flow following this topography. And so that means water is going to continually go from west to east, is going to jump each system as each system loses capacity. And then unfortunately, till it gets to your east end where you have the railroad track, that creates a damming effect that kind of captures it and gets it down that southeast end. You can see on the southeast corner of the city limits, those greens that are inside it. That means that's some pretty low land that's over there. So you have sheet flow coming, and you have Brays Bayou itself creating some floodplain. Next slide, please. So what you're seeing here is similar to the topography, but this is a depth flooding map. And this is from the detailed two-dimensional hydraulic model that we're currently developing for y'all right now. And what this model does is it actually, based on the rainfall inputs that we put in, your topography, your land use characteristics, the sizes of your north-south systems, it starts computing and figuring out which direction the water is going to go based on whatever the surrounding flooding conditions are. And this is the preliminary results of the 100-year floodplain as it flows through the city. You can see on Chimney Rock some pretty deep purples. That's some pretty deep flooding there from 3 to 4 feet. And what's occurring is the model is seeing water come across your city limit line there and entering into the city of Bel Air. And then as we go kind of to the east, can y'all hear me?
We can now.
Lost
Now
you
we
for-
can. We lost you for a minute there.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, lost you.
It came up and said y'all muted me. I thought maybe Brand got tired of me and went to sleep.
No, you're good.
Okay. So did y'all hear me talk about 610?
No.
No.
Okay. So as you see 610 there, this is, did y'all hear me talk about the depth flooding map? I'm sorry.
No, not really.
Okay. So this I'll start over on this slide. This is a preliminary result of the detailed 2D hydraulic model we're creating of the city of Bel Air and Braze to really be able to vet out these improvements and the issues occurring within the city. So what you're seeing here as you get the light blues are flooding about 1/2 a foot all the way up to greens, which is pretty deep flooding. And so what it's measuring is it's looking at the conditions and along Chimney Rock and Rice and Newcastle, and it's saying, okay, how much water can travel through the storm sewer down the Cypress Ditch and out the Braze, and then how much, if it can't handle that, then where does the water go, which is continually overflowing to the east. And you can kind of see there along 610, a lot of that sheet flow gets up against it and it kind of ponds up. That's what those greens and purples are. And you can kind of see the same effect. It's the same effect on the east side, east of Newcastle, right against the railroad track.
Hey,
Next
quick
slide.
question to you. This is a 24-hour, 100-year event, or what's causing this now?
This is a 100-year, 24-hour Atlas 14 event. That's what these are preliminary results from the model that we have right now. That is correct. So that's about, I think it's 16.9 inches of rain in 24 hours. That's what you're seeing the result of right here. And then we put, one thing we did do is we have an analysis line along Chimney Rock so we can see how much water is entering the city limits. And we're utilizing this in our later calculations to help size some north-south systems to handle that flow.
Stephen, real quick, this is Brant. Just to clarify on something you said earlier, you mentioned the typical Atlas 14 storm of the 16 inches over 24-hour period, correct?
Correct.
And that is, I'm sorry?
16.9 inches.
Okay, and that is an even distribution during that 24-hour period, correct?
No, it is not an even distribution. There is a distribution that it's in the flood control manual that generally centers the peak intensity of the storm at roughly hour 16. And then it alternates out.
Okay.
So you see you'll see a big high intensity rain in the model around hour 14 to 20. And that's really what kind of causes a lot of your problems.
Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm. So I guess next slide. So as we're going through the concept plan and we're trying to develop some solutions, these are just some typical examples of flood control features that we're looking at. You got detention ponds. You know, they're used to hold water and detain it and to reduce flow rates. We have drainage channels, which are real good at moving water and getting it out of the city or to wherever it needs to be. Storm sewers, which y'all are probably pretty familiar with. That's 95% of what serves the city of Bel Air right now. Pump stations, they have kind of unique interactions with the system, and they can be beneficial in certain situations. And then the last thing that we've been looking at is flood tunnels, mainly due because y'all are a fairly well-developed area. There's not a lot of green space. You can see in those pictures, drainage channels and detention ponds take up green space. So flood tunnels is kind of a newer technology to the Houston area. I'm going to turn it over to Brian for a minute here to give you a quick preview of flood tunnels and how they could be utilized in the city of Bel Air.
Sure thing. Thanks, Stephen. Brian Gettinger, Freeze and Nichols here. Tunnels are my personal area of expertise, and I've been helping the team analyze them as part of this concept development. This is a concept that has had a little bit of press in Houston over the last 3 years since Hurricane Harvey, as an opportunity to help mitigate stormwater impacts without a lot of surface disruption. So the reason you do a tunnel project is, as Stephen noted, you've got an urban environment that's highly developed. You've got streets, other utilities, buildings, trees, things that you don't want to tear up, but you need to move a lot of water, in this case, stormwater. The system would operate for this Bel Air study. We've assumed an inverted siphon. An inverted siphon operates entirely by gravity during a storm event, and it does so because the upstream elevation. So as Stephen showed on previous topographic maps, we have a higher elevation on the north and west side of the city, and a lower elevation on the south and east side of the city. The tunnel would start on the north side and move to the south and east side, and that change in elevation, as the tunnel fills up, the change in elevation will actually move water to the tunnel, and the rate at which it moves that water is a function of how big the tunnel is and how many feet of elevation there are. There are actually other tunnels like this in the state of Texas. There's probably most famously is the San Antonio River Tunnel, which protects the Riverwalk in San Antonio. City of Austin has one in downtown Austin, on the east side of downtown, and then City of Dallas is currently building one. Harris County Flood Control District is studying this for a much larger tunnel for different parts of the watershed as well. So the concept's been proven in Texas. The challenge we have in Houston is that, unlike San Antonio and Austin and even Dallas, over 3 miles, we have only a few feet of differential elevation, whereas over 3 miles in San Antonio, they might have 20 feet. So in order to move the same amount of water, you have to have a larger diameter, but the same amount of water can be moved in this kind of a system. So go ahead on to the next slide. This is a photo of a tunnel. It's got a precast concrete segment liner. This is a tunnel actually in Washington, D.C., and very similar soils to what we have here in the city of Bel Air. It's 24 foot in diameter. This is still under construction, so everything you see in there right now is in there in order to allow the tunnel to be constructed. The tunnel boring machine is way down the tunnel from here. If you guys want to watch a kind of a cool video about how this works, if you go to YouTube and look for earth pressure balance tunnel boring machine, earth pressure balance tunnel boring machine, there's some really awesome, a couple minute long YouTube videos showing how the system works. But essentially, you know, in Houston, we have poor soils generally. We have high groundwater, and that's a combination that makes it very difficult to excavate. And we're talking about here a tunnel that might be 20 or 30 feet in diameter and 100 feet deep. And if we were talking about this in 1950 or 1960, this wasn't something that was possible to build. But the technology has improved dramatically over the last 10 to even 20 years, where the types of soils that we have here, just like in Washington, D.C., are very excavatable by the current technology. The machine's actually able to excavate and fully support the ground and the groundwater. So there's no settlement, and there's no impacts to the surface. So a tunnel like this can mine for 3 to 5 miles between shaft sites if you needed to, and along that route there's no sound, there's no vibration, there's no dust. So all the complaints that we see from other kinds of construction projects are really only isolated to the shaft locations on a tunnel. You can go ahead and go on to the next slide. So the next question is, okay, so if the problem is isolated to a shaft site, what does the shaft site look like? In all cases, we're looking at, because the tunnel is going to flow to Brays Bayou on the south end, the tunnel would start at Brays Bayou, and so your largest area of disturbance is near the bayou. We're looking at a few different sites there that could be potentially used for that, which are a couple acres in size. The other structures along the tunnel are just to get flow into it, and so those are drop structures. They're a lot smaller. The example here is from Cleveland, Ohio, another tunnel project. It's at about a half-acre shaft site. You see there in the middle of the page, there's a circle with a crane hanging over it from a satellite image. And then on the right side of the intersection, there's kind of a rectangular excavation. So you've got a couple different excavations in order to tie flow in from a near surface sewer into that tunnel. And then on to the next slide, you can see what that looks like after construction. So it's a pretty small area during construction. On the next slide, post-construction, if you didn't know what to look for, it would have a hard time finding out what was really there. So here's a couple renderings of what that site looks like. Oftentimes these places can be improved to park space. You usually have some concrete panels somewhere that you could remove for access in the future. But tunnels are the solution that you use when other methods are too disruptive or too challenging on cost basis because of the number of utilities need to be relocated. The challenge on tunnels is generally speaking, they're more expensive than other solutions. And so they are often the option of last resort. But in an urban area with high property values and a lot of, particularly along Bella Boulevard where you've got a lot of trees and things, we don't want to disrupt that. With other kind of infrastructure, tunnels can be a solution that can work, and that's why we're evaluating that as part of the study. Next slide. All right, back to you, Stephen.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, I have got a lot of information on this slide. I probably should have broke it up for you all. So what we have completed to date is we've done we're still in the process of developing the detailed hydraulic model. There's a lot that goes into that, but we use some more generalized calculations to kind of develop some concepts so that way you can consider and kind of see order and magnitude of what the city, flood control, textile, which are all facing to help start solving these issues. For this exercise, what you're going to see is we compute the peak flows for the 10 and 100-year Atlas 14 storm events. You've heard the terms 100-year, 500-year, and whatnot. The 10-year rain event is an 8.7-inch rain in 24 hours for Braze Bayou, and the 100-year is a 16.9 in 24 hours. That kind of gives you a kind of a benchmark there to go by. When we say we're computing for a 10-year, that does not mean there's not also a benefit still to be realized in a 100-year event. It's just a 10-year, that rainfall is what we utilize and compare it to our analysis points, which is what we call our maximum ponding elevation. And so what we've done is we've gone through the city at key locations and said, we don't want the ponding to be any higher than this with our system. And so then we size the system for that design event so that way we don't exceed that elevation. Now at bigger rain events and lower rain events, you still have benefits. It's just, we're using, when we say 10-year, we're just using that rainfall for that one instance to compute the size of the structures. The last thing that goes into this is we made the sheet flow assumptions, and that was that slide a little while back. We got hung up on the volume, the connection, but we're using from our preliminary model 1200 CFS coming into the Rice system from Chimney Rock. We had some meetings with the city of Houston and looked at their preliminary results from the Chimney Rock study, and they identified 600, but they also didn't have some of the other restrictions and some of the other assumptions that we've made. And our 1200 CFS is an Atlas 14 number, not a old rainfall number. That's probably the biggest difference in the assumption. So next slide, please. So these points you see, these are our analysis points that we're measuring the sizing against. So we'll take whatever our design rainfall is, 10 or 100. We'll compute a flow rate off that, which is based on how much water gets to each point and the characteristics of the land, how developed it is, obviously very developed, how steep it is, all those sorts of parameters. And then with that flow rate, we say we need culverts or a tunnel or a channel that is X big until the hydraulic grade line or the water surface elevation is at or below those numbers you see kind of called out on the screen there. So that's how we size these systems that you're about to see. Generally, they're at low points that occur. You can see they're kind of occurring at a lot of those deep ponding areas that you saw on that sheet flow map. So this is what we looked at. The assumption in these numbers is that the design event ponding is within the right-of-way. That means you would still have water in the road, but in the design event, there should be no structural flooding or water outside the right-of-way based on these numbers in the concepts we're about to show you. So that's the assumption when we're talking about these different cost numbers. Next slide, please. So we evaluated 3 concepts, and they, like everything in life, there's good things and bad things about each one. And it's kind of going to be up to y'all to provide guidance on which, what makes the most sense for for y'all in your particular situation. So you'll see on each exhibit, this is concept A, but let me give you something that corresponds to all of them. You can see that dark, kind of thick brown line that's going up the east side. Yeah, thank you. That is what we're calling the major trunk system. That is going to be either a channel, a tunnel, or a very, very large storm sewer system. And it's the main conveyance path to collect water and get it out of the city to Brays Bayou. You'll see those dashed green lines. Brand, I don't know if you can point at those real quick. Those are more minor collectors, and those are the water that will get it to a major system. So in concept A, you're going to see where it says N2 and N3. We've evaluated that length to either be a flood control channel or a tunnel. And then you'll see along Bel Air, we've evaluated that to be a tunnel. And then up Rice to either be a tunnel or a storm sewer. So we have a lot of different combinations here that we're evaluating for you. So that's what you're going to see in these three concepts, and that's what the colors mean. So particular to concept A, if you remember that topo map where it showed the land generally going west to east, this is trying to mimic the collection and conveyance of that. Normally, the more you can follow topography, the smaller and easier it is to drain that area. So that's what concept A is trying to accomplish, is to say, okay, how do I get that east-west, use that to our benefit, and then get that water down to Brays Bayou. R4 is where the majority of the sheet flow is coming into the city. And so that makes a real good point to collect in a major system and get it down. The other thing this one does, because it's diverting, it's essentially taking the majority of the city directly to Brays, it alleviates the need to have to expand Cypress Ditch. So by diverting a lot of acreage off of Cypress Ditch, we can save money now because the Cypress Ditch is big enough to handle the remaining acreage going to it. If we don't do that, then we'd have to do significant work on Cypress Ditch. Next concept, please. This is concept B. And concept B really proposes a major tunnel down 610. We evaluated it could be a storm sewer channel, but you're not going to put a flood control channel down the edge of 610. There's not going to be room there. What this is doing is trying to capture that sheet flow at 610, where you saw those dark greens and purples showing that extensive depth of flooding. And then if we can capture it all with the 610 system, then Newcastle can be a more reasonably sized storm sewer system and take care of Newcastle by itself. This system proposes there would need to be some improvement to Cypress Ditch upstream of 610 to get the water into a shaft and into the tunnel. But generally downstream of 610, no improvements would be needed because the tunnel would divert it all to the south to a flood control pond, possibly a new pond, maybe on the north side of Brays, to be determined. But this is the general alignment of what we would see as a tunnel down the 610 frontage road corridor. If you go to the next slide, please, Brent. So concept C really maintains your existing drainage corridors, meaning Rice, 610, and Newcastle are some sort of storm sewer or tunnel which convey the water down to Cypress Ditch, and in Cypress Ditch we get that water out to Brays Bayou. Under this scenario, we'd have to do significant improvements to Cypress Ditch, which, if I'm sure y'all have all seen it on the south side, is very challenged from a right-of-way standpoint. So it'll be significant concrete lining, structural work needed to make those improvements. Go to the next slide, please, Brent. So another component to all this, and this occurs with any of these concepts, when we put in these bigger systems, we're speeding up the rainfall getting to Brays Bayou. If you don't provide detention mitigation volume for it, then that will be a flow increase downstream, and you'd be increasing flooding onto somebody else. So what you have to do is provide some sort of regional mitigation volume, detention volume to Brays Bayou to help bring your peak back down. We use a more simplified Harris County flood control methodology. I won't go into the details, but it can get kind of significant on a volume that's needed. For a 10-year level of service, we're estimating about 300-ish acre-foot of detention volume. To put that in perspective, that is about a 24-acre pond, 24 acres to create that volume. In the 100-year, it would be 783. Now, the detailed hydraulic model will really flesh out what this volume needs to be. This is just an initial estimate to help us with an order of magnitude.
And Stephen, pardon me, can you explain a little bit more about the calculation of an acre foot and you know, what that means and how you accomplish that
sure.
in some scenarios?
Yeah, so what we're assuming is that this pond, I think it's a pretty good assumption, that this volume would either be in a regional Harris County flood control facility or something new that we're having to construct, which would most likely would need to be along Bray's Bayou. So based on a depth of Bray's 15-ish feet, you know, based on some kind of standard flood control requirements for detention pond design, we take that depth, you know, that backs into a top area to provide maintenance berm access, side slopes, and all those other things. So that's how we would size that volume. Brian, I don't know if that answered your question.
And 1 acre foot is equal to the amount of water that that would be held, you know, 1 foot deep, 1 square foot, 1 foot deep, correct?
Yes, that is correct. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yes, and 1 acre, 1 foot deep, that's an acre foot.
Okay.
Okay, next slide, please. This is looking at how to maximize the cypress ditch improvements. You can tell, so the blue line is the existing surveyed cross-section of cypress ditch, and the yellow would be the maximum that you could obtain within the existing right-of-way of cypress ditch. Looked at some options of putting a tunnel or major storm sewer system underneath it. Initial estimates were kind of showing that was probably going to be more or less cost effective than just concrete lining the channel, but further details to come on that as we progress through the detailed part of the study. Next slide, please. So we're going to start getting into talking about the cost and the different issues with each concept. Obviously, cost is one of the, if not the biggest factor that goes into these decisions. And it's pretty substantial to get 100-year level of service. What you're looking at here is a pie chart that kind of breaks down the different percentages, or this is concept A. And you can see there in the gray, land acquisition for the channel is your biggest expense. We could look at going to a tunnel, but then what would happen if we go to the next slide, Brent? This is concept B with the tunnel, where you can see the tunnel, you have a small land acquisition cost, but a high tunnel cost. So it's kind of weighing those two back and forth between the different options. Now, obviously, those produce different results for you from a constructability standpoint, but both these provide the same 100-year level of service. So if you go to the next slide, Brent. This is a shot that we took at kind of providing a phasing. Again, this is concept A, 100-year for the channel. You can see that would be a big capital outlay up front to purchase the right-of-way needed for the channel. And then the construction dollars aren't too bad beyond that. It's that land acquisition cost that is pretty high there on concept A. So next phase. Next slide, excuse me. So this is comparing to a tunnel slide where you can see your real tunnel happen. I mean, your real cost happens in that kind of third segment there when you actually go to construction on the tunnel. So that you have a big capital outlay then. You got the design and all that the 2 years before that. And then it tapers off as you go down and you get to your minor collectors, which the minor collectors are showing only in 2 years, but that could be phased, you know, it could be spread out depending on, you know, financial abilities and those sorts of things. Go to the next slide. And then concept C is a more even distribution of how those funds could occur. Concept C is probably going to be your easiest one to phase just because it's not as dependent on the other components. and you can do separate pieces independently of each other. So go to
Yeah, the
the next
concept
slide.
is really kind of three discrete projects that work together, but they're separate.
Correct. So what you're seeing here is a comparison of all the different scenarios that we've run. Really what we're trying to show here is that they're expensive, but there's not a lot of delta between the majority of them. So it's really going to kind of come down more to your preferences and how it interacts with the city. Those big green, the ones you can see where you have the green bars that are substantial, that's the channel, excuse me, that's the channel land acquisition cost. You can see the orange ones that are just a little bit higher than the others are generally the tunnel, but they kind of follow all the same trends. And this is 10 and 100 mixed together here. So you're seeing both 10-year level of service and 100-year level of service. Next slide, please. So this is just the 10-year ones only. There's no 100-year mixed into this. And you can see generally they're ranging from roughly, there's not a lot of variation between them. These numbers do have, I'll go ahead and point it out, they do have a pretty high contingency. You can see in that gray. You know, at the level that we're at, and Brian can add on to this if you want to. At the level that we're at, we're holding a pretty high contingency just because there's a lot of unknowns that are going into, particularly from a constructability standpoint of what can be accomplished and whatnot. So you're going to see a high contingency on these numbers that as we get better data, hopefully we can shrink that contingency down and get those numbers, at least get you some savings there.
Yeah, and we wanted to stack these up next to each other to see if there was a clear differentiation by method. And there is some, but it's not at the level of detail we're talking about. It wasn't distinct. And so we're going to need to go further into the analysis and look at the hydraulic performance once the model's complete and see if that provides a little bit more distinction on benefits, as well as get feedback from you guys on what kind of improvements can we do and kind of what kind of disturbances are allowed.
Yeah, so next slide, please, Brian. Same comparison. This is just 100-year level of service now. Similar story to 10-year. They're all fairly comparable, and there's nothing that really sticks out and says, this is the best option from a cost standpoint. Next slide. Okay, so as we kind of talked about, this is a little bit of a pros and cons discussion at this point of the three different concepts. Like anything, they all have good things and bad things about them. So concept A, we can get you a 100-year level of service. It's going to be expensive. It's pretty disruptive due to needing to purchase the land for the channel along that east side. And that's a pretty big, that's a significant upfront financial investment. But once you have once you have the land, the construction gets a lot easier for concept A. You can start phasing it. You can phase the construction of a channel is actually not very expensive at all. It's getting the land that's expensive. And the last thing is it would divert the flows. It would divert the majority of the city off of Cypress Ditch, which would then save you money from having to do any significant improvements in Cypress Ditch. One of the downsides to this one, concept A, is just how much money you got to do up front, and so it's a big upfront investment. Next slide, please. So concept B, same deal. We can get you a 100-year level of service. It requires a big upfront financial investment, but not for land acquisition. It's because of that tunnel. We got to do the main trunk first. And to get that main trunk, you don't phase the tunnel. Once you get the machine down, you're going to build that whole stretch of it. So that's why you're seeing that big construction, those big construction dollars up front. It, as Brian was describing in the tunnel section, you'll avoid any major disruptions with building the tunnel because it's all underground. You just got the shaft sites and all that, and it can be much more managed, which is maybe an important consideration considering how developed you are and how little space there really is to work within a city for a major improvement. And then this concept also bypasses Cypress Ditch, and gets that water directly to Braze, which then saves you money on the Cypress ditch side. Next slide, please. In Concept C, so we have 100-year cost numbers, but frankly, you're not going to build 100-year storm sewers down Newcastle or Rice or 610. There is not right away to put the size storm sewer systems that are needed. Those would have to be tunnels, which is really going to get that price up on you. So frankly, Concept C probably is not going to provide you the 100-year level of service unless you want to do it with tunnels. The projects would be disruptive. Y'all know how street roadway reconstruction projects go. They would have to tear up the entire street to be able to put in the storm sewers. We'd have to move utilities around, adjust for conflicts, all those sorts of things. So it would be disruptive during construction. But the one thing Concept C can be, it can be phased as long or as little or as quickly or as however you need to match your funding availability. Generally, if you're going to phase it, you would start at the downstream end and work your way up, which would mean Cypress Ditch would probably be your initial phases. But it's something that you could divide up into maybe more manageable chunks if you can't get any substantial funding for the other solutions. Concepts A and B would probably long-term provide you a better service system if you could get past the upfront financial investment, but Concept C is going to be the one that probably fits a financing model a little bit better than the other two. The last caveat I'm going to add, and I should have said this at the beginning, is that these are all looking at how to get the water out of Bel Air into Braze Bayou. Keep in mind, if Braze Bayou comes out and has one of these 500-year events, you're still going to see flooding on the south end or up to whatever level Braze gets within the city. You're definitely going to see improved conditions within the city, but you are still going to you're still subject to whatever Braze Bayou can flood you with. So keep that in mind as you're evaluating these different concepts. Next slide, please.
So I think important to say on these concepts, these are probably the whole elephant on these concepts, right? That these are the complete solutions. As we get further into the modeling effort, we can take deeper dives and see if there's bottlenecks that we could provide substantial benefit with downside solutions. So this is, I think, probably what the upper end looks like on these concepts. Is that fair to say, Stephen?
Yes, I agree.
And Stephen, this is Brant. I'll introduce these next two slides and we can kind of go through them. But as we were working through the presentation, we had conversations among staff, along with the engineering team, to kind of look at what our initial observations were for the findings that you've seen here this evening and some potential next steps. And what we want to look at is we want to be able to identify a path forward that includes some practicality and some means to look at these huge projects and these huge budgets and really start to parse them down into it's kind of what was alluded to earlier, some manageable pieces. So we talk about the concept of value engineering, some of the initial concepts that you saw, looking for that low-hanging fruit or some smaller projects that are consistent with the findings and with kind of the overall direction that this study takes, looking very closely at phasing, breaking it up to more manageable chunks, and then looking at the benefits for each concept and level of service. Obviously, what we're focusing on is removing structures from that flood risk. And we've talked about a 10-year storm design versus a 100-year storm design, and some of you may be like, well, all of the examples that you brought up were far beyond the 10-year storm design. And that is true, that a lot of the examples that you saw for the rainfall events were beyond that 10-year storm design. But one of the things that as the data becomes more concrete, we'll be able to look at, okay, what structures would benefit from the 10-year storm design, and what's that delta onto the 100-year storm design? Because chances are we're going to find that there's not a 10-time multiplier there in the benefit as there would be in just looking at the at the storm design criteria. So I'll pause here. Stephen, Brian, James, anyone else that wants to weigh in before I go to the next one?
Yeah, so Brant, just to follow up on what Brant said, the detailed hydraulic model is really going to allow us to zero in on which structures are getting the benefits for the different design storm events. And as part of that model, we're, once we develop and we kind of get a better idea what concept makes sense for y'all, we're going to evaluate, we'll run Harvey through the model and see, where you're going to have benefits and where you wouldn't. We'll also evaluate for a range of storm events, not just the 10 and the 100 in the detailed model. 10 and 100 is what we have right now for the basic calculations, but you'll have a range of level of service to consider. It won't just be 10 and 100.
Okay, and so moving forward, obviously we've talked about some very steep budget numbers, and it's important that we continue to look for funding opportunities, for partnerships, for some means forward that would allow for some of this to actually occur. And so you'll see a few examples there. One of the interesting things, and Brian, I don't know if you want to speak to this a bit, but we are in very interesting times right now. And so, for example, when we're looking at TWDB funding, we're looking at extremely low interest rates that in years past, when TWDB funding was evaluated, typically it always seemed to be more economical to go with the bond option. And I think at least for some of their programs and in some scenarios, the reverse may be true. We have a couple timeline milestones here identified. We're expecting the results of the hydraulic modeling to come in December, and then we're hoping to have the report finalized in March. And then from that point, depending on which direction we go, how we choose to proceed, the next step would be a PER, a preliminary engineering report for what's being recommended. And I'll defer back to Stephen, James, Brian, if you want to add anything to that.
Thanks, Brent. That's a great point. And to expand on the low interest loans, low interest rates are available on all kinds of products. And the Texas Water Development Board has always provided an interest rate variance, being a discount for interest rates. Right now, that interest rate discount makes the interest rate available for the City of Bel Air through their Clean Water Revolving Fund. It would be at 0% on a 30-year loan. So clearly, that provides a substantial savings on a large debt service product. That rate does fluctuate with the market, but it always will have that discounted rate. So that does allow us to potentially do more things than we could have otherwise done in a different interest rate environment. But clearly, as Brant noted, we need to right size the project to be an affordable one that can be implemented, because the point of the study is to move something forward that can have a significant benefit for the City of Bel Air for flood damage reductions.
And so at this point, we'll pause and take any questions and comments from the task force. After that exchange is over, we will then move on further to the agenda that will open up the floor to those that signed up from the public. So at this point, I will pause and allow for any task force members that had any questions or comments for the engineering team to make those now.
Hey, Brant, this is Jonathan Rychek.
Go ahead, Mr. Rychek. Yes, sir.
So this is a question for you. What percent of the project do you envision Bel Air funding ultimately?
Well, I think there's a variety of ways to answer that. I think it depends on the scope for one. It depends on where the benefit is going to be realized. For example, if we're talking about doing something that's just local to Bel Air that doesn't have that regional component to it initially, then we would certainly have to. It would be tougher to find partners for a phase like that. But I think the most important thing for us to do is to work with our partners and really, as we're doing the same thing, as we're looking at what solutions work for us, as that we can live with from a project scope, a timeline, a cost, and what all of those factors put together, how that affects us. All of our partners need to do the same thing. And so depending on those variables, we might have 10 different answers for 10 different project scenarios. So I think the best way I can answer your question is that we need to maintain the lines of communication with our partners and with potential other entities out there in order to be able to really maximize the benefit of any partnerships that would come about.
Okay, thank you.
And
Brent, this is Wayne Frazier.
Okay, I was going to say, Wayne, I think I see your hand up there.
Yeah, I was trying to be high tech like you and raise my hand online here.
Well, I was confused because it's right next to mine, but got you here. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, just a couple of general questions. First of all, I believe our assumptions are being made on the current status of Braze in terms of the work that's been done over the last several years in Braze. Am I correct in that assumption? We're basing our estimates on all three exhibits based on the current status of Braze in the event that we felt the improvements will be what Braze has been identified to be improved by.
We are considering Project Braze being in place for your sizing of your system.
Okay, right. Second question, and thank you for talking about the 2D hydraulic model. Now, I know that model has been around for a couple of decades. Have there been recent changes or improvements that will make this even more effective in terms of being as close to actual as you can get it these days?
Yeah, so that's a good question. We're using for this analysis XP Swim 2D. The reason for that is it has a good interface between what we call underground, the storm sewers, and the surface, which is very important for y'all's study. The one thing about modeling, I don't know if y'all have ever heard the saying, all maps are wrong, but some are useful. The same thing applies to models. We're running design storm events. We're running real ones to the extent so that way we can verify that the models produce reasonable results. I've had James look at the results and say, hey, this is what the current hydraulic model is showing. Does that make sense to you? So, there's definitely, it's not going to be exact, but it's going to be, we verify these models as best we can against what's really happened to y'all. So then we know we have a good design tool to measure these concepts against. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's the process that we generally take with modeling.
It absolutely did answer. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Frazier. Stephen,
Hello.
thank you as well. Mr. Canonico, I believe I saw you next.
Hey, real quick, slide 31, Stephen. Brandon, if you can go 31. On the east side under concept A, you're proposing a channel, is that correct?
A channel or a tunnel.
How much right of way are you coming? And I assume that's coming not inside the railroad right of way, is that correct?
That would be correct.
How wide is that?
It's about 200 to 250 feet, depending on which level of service we design it for.
So just to confirm, that's about 6 houses.
It's more than 6 houses. That'd be 200 to 250 feet wide along that entire stretch there.
Yeah, 6 houses, okay.
Okay, you mean 6 houses at the end, I understand. Yes.
So
That's why that land acquisition number is so high.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. Chris, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
All right, thanks. Mr. Hosey, I believe you had a question?
Yes. Are you aware of whether City of Bel Air has imminent, can force people to sell their property to us?
That is a tool that is available to local governments for a project such as this. Actually, for any project, is certainly not a route that I would personally recommend. But we're very preliminary at this stage, and I think that we would look at property acquisition, certainly on a voluntary level first, having had to go through the condemnation process in the past in other places. I can tell you that if you want to slow your project down and increase your costs, that is the way to go. So it's certainly not something I would recommend.
How many houses would that channel cause us to purchase?
I'm going to defer to.
I think it was around 200 unique properties. Don't hold me to that number. I'd have to verify.
No, I'm just pointing out 200. There's a person who's the last person to sell the house in Greenway Plaza. They got $1.5 million for his property, for his house.
Yeah.
And that was back when $1.5 million was a lot of money. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Hast, I believe I see your hand.
Yes, thank you. What, if anything, is being done with the railroad? If this tunnel or channel were to go along the railroad right away, only taking the houses that are next to the railroad, can't anything be done to improve the drainage so that it goes under the railroad and exits Bel Air that way, and instead of taking houses?
And Ms. Haas,
or building the tunnel under the railroad track.
Okay, Ms. Haas, I'm going to add to your question for James, Stephen, and potentially Brian on this. And my initial question, I guess, would be at what point would we want to engage the railroad on these conversations? And then, in looking at Ms. Haas' questions, how would those factors play in? And in general, what's the likelihood of the railroad partnering with us on something like that?
So,
Stephen, you want to start? I can.
Yeah.
Let
me answer the first part of the question, which is to the extent that we stay outside the railroad right of way, they don't really have a say. We could look at putting the channel on the east side of the railroad track, again, outside the right of way. We've had some internal discussions of using the center point corridor. They historically have not allowed that. It will probably be a conversation we eventually have with them. Can't get told no if you don't ask. Beyond that, then you're condemning houses in West U, which you're in the same problem that you have on your side.
That's Houston, not West U.
That's true. Sorry, it's Houston. Yeah. So, well, you're condemning outside of your city limits. Not that I don't know if you can or can't do that, to be honest. As far as being directly underneath the railroad track with the tunnel, I'll have to defer to Brian on that one.
Sure. So railroads are challenging landowners. They date their ownership of that land predating even the municipal uses. So oftentimes cities, and I don't know, Brant, what Bel Air's rules are, but the city is not able to condemn the railroad property based on the way the state views that ownership. You can certainly put a tunnel underneath the railroad track, but as a property owner, the railroad does have authority to approve or deny your use of the land. So generally speaking, tunnels are allowed to cross railroad tracks on a perpendicular or near perpendicular basis. It could parallel near a railroad track, although they're not going to like that very much. It's very unlikely that they would allow us to go underneath the railroad track directly, even though the likelihood of damaging the track would be very low. Historically, the railroads, because of the concern of any potential track damage and operation of their business, would not let you cross or not let you follow the track directly. Crossing's okay, but following the track directly would be a challenge.
So let me restate one of the questions I had. Even though the likelihood might be fairly low, at what point in the study would it be, or at what point in the next steps would it be appropriate for at least to ask the question of the railroad, if this is something that could be worked out?
I think on a tunneling basis, you probably have a better chance of talking to CenterPoint about building a tunnel underneath their right of way. Generally speaking, on a pipeline down the CenterPoint right of way, they would require you to tunnel that pipeline. If it was open cut, they want you to tunnel it near the towers anyway. So there is precedent for tunneling along CenterPoint right of way. That would be a challenge potentially on a open channel down that route. We could certainly have a conversation on the railroad. It would be one branch that I would have low expectations for, but there's no, like Stephen said, if we don't ask, it's clearly a no. And I think now that we understand the potential cost of the land acquisition for that channel and the displacement of homes it would require, which both are significant, we need to think through if concept A is the approach we want to take, how we can mitigate that through different avenues, whether that's using the railroad property or the CenterPoint easement.
Okay, so
to try to reduce cost and impacts.
Let me expand my question then to include CenterPoint. At what point during this process would we want to engage the railroad and or CenterPoint? How far away are we from actually wanting to have those conversations?
Yeah. I really think we're there, Brant. It's time to, once we zero in on one of these concepts, we can have those conversations. We've actually had conversations with the railroad about opening up an opening, through the railroad track, and that they'd be willing to look at that. But the problem with that idea is, you'd be affecting downstream property owners. So we'd have to find a detention method just further to the east if we did open up the track for flood flows.
So, Ms. Hast, I apologize for somewhat hijacking your question, but I do want to make sure that you got the answers you were looking for.
Well, at one point in the past, TxDOT was actually considering getting the railroad to abandon that right of way and putting a freeway there, or putting a major highway there. And I think that there was I think this may have been like 15 or 20 years ago, and there was a big outcry and they never followed up on it, thank goodness. But I'm wondering if that railroad, getting them to abandon that right of way might be an option. And it seems to me that even if it's not, then the CenterPoint property, I mean, that would be a whole lot more attractive location for a tunnel than condemning a bunch of people's homes in Bel Air.
Yeah, so that's an excellent point. I think one clarification I do want to draw there is the tunnel itself would not require condemnation above it. I personally would not want to route a tunnel under people's houses. Again, just like the railroad track, you could do it, but I know myself as a property owner, I wouldn't want a tunnel under my house. So the tunnel would try to follow right away as much as possible. But if it were to cross through someone's yard or something like that, it wouldn't require condemnation the same way that a surface improvement like a box culvert or a channel would, which is sometimes why tunnels are seen as favorable, because they have less impacts on the surface use.
Right, I agree. Nobody wants a tunnel under their house. That would be a little bit, that would be pretty scary. But it seems that since one of the major causes of flooding in Bel Air is that railroad damming up the water so that it can't drain out of Bel Air, then the railroad and or Centerpoint need to be part of the solution. And that would be a whole lot better than you know, taking a bunch of people's houses.
I think the acquisition costs that were presented certainly illustrate that aspect of it. Anything else from any of the members at this point?
Yeah, two things, Brian, real quick. How much of the flow or challenge is the Houston overflow coming into Bel Air as one? And the other comment is somewhere in your report it needs to address the loss of tax revenue if you are going to take properties, because that is a sizable revenue hit to a smaller town like Bel Air.
I think that's, I don't want to, speak for any potential analysis that might cover that. I do think that is not necessarily a clear-cut answer, pending whatever benefits to the tax base that might provide. But James, Brian, Stephen, any thoughts on that?
I'm not certain on the tax rate question, but on the sheet flow, it's about a 15-ish% increase in pipe size to accommodate the sheet flow. We've looked at it both ways. The other thing that I know the city has been doing separately kind of from the study, but they've been coordinating with City of Houston to try to get the Chimney Rock project to capture most of that flow, or at least a good majority of it. So we've been looking at it both ways for y'all, both with and without the sheet flow from Chimney Rock.
Yeah, and Chris, you are right on that, the land acquisition. If the city were to purchase those properties would be permanently removed from the tax roll, and therefore any future tax revenue from those properties would be also removed from the rolls. So it does have an immediate cost and a long-term impact.
Yeah, I understand. I'd much rather prefer exploring the Centerpoint option around right there. You're not going to do it as a railroad. The railroad was here 130 years ago, but I'd certainly like the Centerpoint option is evaluate that route now, because otherwise we're really hindering folks.
Yeah, and that same thread, I think, Chris, is why we were looking at the tunnel on Concept B, utilizing the access lanes on the west side of 610, because that's a publicly owned right of way. It would require additional coordination with TxDOT and getting them comfortable. It's just like we have to get the railroad comfortable or Centerpoint comfortable with the concept to try to minimize private property impacts in the city. And the same reason Concept C follows those thoroughfares for the same reason.
Agreed.
And I know that with the railroad right of way, if I'm not mistaken, James, you probably have the best handle on this question, but I'm pretty sure all of the railroad right of way itself is within the city of Houston.
Correct. That's correct.
That's certainly an added wrinkle to to that discussion as well. Okay, any other questions or comments regarding the presentation?
Just another point. I know we've sort of beating this concept to death, but I think in addition to the homes that you're going to purchase for Concept A, it's also the homes that are going to be next to this tunnel that you're going to build. They're going to have a significant drop in value, and again, additional loss in tax revenue. So something else to consider while you're looking at the total cost benefit analysis, because who wants to live next to a large waterway?
And I think we're starting to, if I may, I think we're starting to hear kind of a trend. And I certainly would be interested in seeing among the committee members if we could maybe establish some sort of consensus for any of the concepts or any of the potential construction methods. Ms. Hast, I see you had a question?
Well, I just have a comment. Another factor that I think should be considered in the cost benefit analysis is the reduction in home values that will occur after another major flood. You know, we took a big hit after Harvey, and those numbers haven't totally recovered. They're better than they were, but still there was a drop in tax revenue because property values declined significantly. And every time there's a flood, when there hasn't been anything done to mitigate the effect of the flood, there's going to be a hit on property values.
And I think that's a very good point, and sort of along the same lines of what I was alluding to earlier when Chris asked his question about the potential property tax loss from the acquisition of land. You would see, it wouldn't be a zero-sum game. You would see eventually some increases in values that would come as a result of the protections provided by whatever project is chosen. Obviously, that would take a little bit more time and certainly wouldn't be as immediate as the loss of the value. But I think to your point, you know, we run the risk of seeing values continue to decline from storms, but we also, you know, have an opportunity that if this, whatever path is chosen to move forward, if that does provide a significant benefit that reduces the flooding risk, I think we'll certainly see that pendulum swing the other way.
Right. I think doing nothing is a bad idea.
Were there any other questions, comments? And
Brent, this is Gus Pappas.
yes, sir.
So there's been some questions that have sort of touched on this topic of the contribution that Bel Air would have to make, and certainly we see the contribution that we made with regard to the overall concept and study. But it seems to me, and of course I've already seen this, so I have a bit of a benefit than some of the others perhaps. But it seems to me that at some point in time, a lot of what we're talking about, whether it's condemnation or tunnels or railroads or talking to the railroad or talking to Centerpoint and all these various intergovernmental type discussions, agreements, what have you, I mean, eventually we're not going to be able financially to do anything near what some of these other entities are going to be able to do. You know, we have a fairly strong pushback from our residents on a daily basis, pretty much on taxes and bonds and what have you. And so, when are we going to get an idea in this process of just how much we can rely upon some of the bigger players in this process with regard to some of these concepts? Because it'll be real easy for this group to sit around and go, oh, well, you know, we like B versus A or B versus C or A versus C. But at the end of the day, I just don't see, from my perspective, us being able to pay for any of that, not during our lifetimes. And so when does that come into play, and what is the protocol for us to sort of evaluate these options? Because I think a critical component is going to be ultimately how much of these other people are going to come in and pay for this. You know, because we can do what we can do here, and we've done some things in the past, and we can certainly do some things in the future. But to me, that's a bigger driver, because we can philosophically discuss all these concepts till the cows come home. But at the end of the day, and I think I agree with Millie, we do need to do something. The question is, what can we do? What will others do? How far can we participate? And how much bang for the buck can we get for our citizens and residents here? Anyway, it's more of a philosophical question, but I do think that at some point in time, a lot of this is academic if we don't really understand how much help we're going to get from others when we decide which way we want to go. Anyway.
And I think, Mayor Pro Tem Pappas, I think you can turn that philosophical question for the purposes of this discussion into a mathematical question and talk about the order of operations that we have to look at in order to even begin to move forward. And so I believe, and James, Stephen, Brian, you can all weigh in on this, but I believe what we're looking for is some sort of consensus on maybe what concepts, if there's a ranking, if there's a preference, and then based on that, we start asking the questions of our potential partners is, this is what we're looking at. What are our opportunities to look at a project that you would be willing to financially participate in? And I think, we were talking a little bit earlier about this. It's all going to depend on, what the assumptions are and what the needs of our potential partners are. So, we obviously have a lot of, of unknown there, but we have to start somewhere. I think as both you and Ms. Hast and a few others have referenced. So I think, if we're looking at our order of operations, if we're going to continue to ask these questions and to explore these possibilities, I think the first step is a consensus, James, weigh in here on what the preferences are.
You're exactly right, Brant. And we've got to remember too that Harris County Flood Control District and TxDOT meet with us every 2 weeks to discuss the progress, the plan. They were involved in discussing this presentation, but we need to get these 3 concepts out, to hear your issues with that. Certainly there's an issue with condemnation. We hear that loud and clear. And there's also an issue with phasing. What is something that we can appropriately phase that all 3 entities and perhaps even the city of Houston can venture into, which, at this point, to me, it's looking more like concept C for, the phasing opportunities. But we've still got more modeling to do, much more information to work through before we get to that point.
And so, James,
I think
I'm sorry, Brian, go ahead.
I think one of the big things that it's critical for when Stephen has the model complete, and one thing we have to verify, and this is not an Army Corps of Engineers project, but we need to make sure that whatever options we're proceeding with, we can demonstrate to you, the committee, to the taxpayers, to Harris County Flood Control and TxDOT that whatever the capital cost of this project is, that we are going to provide that much flood damage reduction, right? And that we can then, with the model, identify how many structures are going to be removed from the floodplain, how many people are going to be removed from the floodplain, how many businesses are removed from the floodplain. Because in all cases here, we're talking about a major capital investment that's going to need justification. And and Stephen's got some good images here in this presentation, but once that model's complete, we can run a before and after scenario of these. We can make sure the sizing is appropriate to provide the benefit necessary. And we can provide some figures that can demonstrate that, the water here was 4 feet before this project. And then after the project, the water was 2 inches deep, for example. And it takes this many structures out of the floodplain. I think once that model is complete and we have that kind of a justification, and we can compare concept A, concept B, concept C, or maybe even some subvariants of those, we can use that as a tool to demonstrate the benefit. Because if we can't demonstrate a strong benefit, there's no way for us to justify the funding, whether from the city of Bel Air or TxDOT or Flood Control District. And we've made some great progress. We need to get kind of all the way there. So I think maybe one of the messages is to ask for a little patience for us to get to December and have that model complete. Stephen, is that a fair kind of thing to, once we get that model done, have a little more clarity?
We're not going to be able to quantify benefits until we have the detailed hydraulic modeling completed.
Mayor Friedberg, real quick for James. I appreciated, James, a moment ago, your comments on concept C as being the one that would seemingly provide the most phasing options. Understanding you guys, this is still preliminary and you need to dig into it a little deeper. Another distinguishing feature of C is its requirement, as it says at the bottom bullet point, for improvements to Cypress Ditch. My question, James, if you'll confirm, my recollection is flood control district's participation in this project, actually not only the participation, but the scope of work was specifically increased because the flood control district was interested in studying some of these things in our neighborhood. Wasn't Cypress Ditch a big part of that? And in the course of getting to this point, and you said, you know, you meet with them every couple of weeks, are they still talking about Cypress Ditch as being a big focus area for them?
Yes, they certainly are. And we talked to Flood Control about taking over ownership of Cypress Ditch too. And that's something that they've said that they're looking into, taking that away from the city of Houston, which would be a benefit to the city of Bel Air. And
James, I'll just throw out something else there. Mike, if you're still listening in, maybe you might want to weigh in on this as well. You know, we recognize that you know, we are very dependent upon Cypress Ditch, and the city of Houston is the owner of that facility, and so we do. We have had conversations here recently on, you know, some potential maintenance opportunities, and you know, we think that we can continue to work with them, and if it ends up that a change in ownership, you know, would potentially benefit us. I know that we at least know who to talk to. And Mike, you've had conversations with City of Houston on some of those maintenance opportunities, correct?
Yeah, so we've been, that's correct, Brant. This is Mike Leach. We've been building relationships with the City of Houston Maintenance Division, also working with TxDOT. We're meeting on a small project, but a meaningful one to clean out the culverts that go under 610 that are through the Cypress Ditch. So all that stuff is, though it's not a huge project, it certainly helps the performance of that system. So yes, we've been working with those both TxDOT and the City of Houston to build those relationships and to at least work within the existing systems to get a higher quality and more frequent maintenance program going out there.
Thanks, Mike.
So thanks, Mike. And the intent of my question wasn't so much about the existing systems, but rather if Brant is looking for feedback from the task force at this stage between concepts A, B, and C, and what do we think? You know, frankly, Brant, realistically, I don't think the task force, I don't want to speak for the members, of course, but I don't think that we're at a stage where we can give concrete feedback on A, B, or C without the participation of our partners. And given the focus on Cypress Ditch, at least from flood control's perspective, I'd certainly want to hear their plans. D115, I think, is the number assigned to it, because that may very well drive which concept emerges as the one that's most likely, because the flood control district is actually committed not just to maintenance, Mike, but to actually a major overhaul at Cypress Ditch. You know, might that suggest a concept C, because we're going to be part of the way there already?
I think that's certainly a consideration. And in terms of feedback, you know, I think you bring up a good point that, you know, depending on what our partners say, you know, one option may be more feasible than another, but in terms of the initial feedback, I think we've gotten some useful information. And, you know, like you mentioned, Mayor, I don't want to speak for the task force members, but we've heard a lot of the members talk about, you know, kind of an unwillingness to look at large-scale acquisitions of property for any project. And, you know, we've talked about the differences between the acquisition costs in A and C. And obviously, you know, when we're looking at B here, we're talking about 610, which has its own set of issues. So I think in terms of where we go next, you know, we have an idea that, you know, we want to avoid large-scale acquisitions. And so as we're talking to our partners, I think that can at least be a theme, with the understanding that I'm not making an incorrect assumption, but that can be a theme as we continue our conversations and our analysis. And Ms. Hast, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, well, I think that's true that condemning houses would certainly need to be a last resort. But before I can really decide which of the three concepts would be preferable in my mind, I would need to know the information that you said you would have by December, which is what exactly will each of the concepts do in terms of reducing flooding. And I don't think we really have that information yet.
That is correct. So there's a good part of that cost benefit analysis that we don't have the variables for yet. I think obviously we can, look at the concepts and some of the necessary steps that would be involved. And I think we have an idea of, maybe some of the preferences that that might be out there with how any project would proceed. But you're certainly correct in that there are still some variables missing in terms of the overall cost benefit analysis. Mr. Rychek, I see you had a question or a comment.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I'm not sure if this question's for you or not, but it kind of seems to me like the plan that's most likely to be selected is really the one that the regional partners would want, not really what the task force wants. So maybe can somebody tell us, and I don't know if anybody knows the answer, if which one makes the most sense for the regional partners?
I'm not sure, James, Stephen, or Brian. I'm not sure if one of you were speaking.
Well, again, we just aren't there yet, and we keep trying to focus back on the December finishing this model, so that we can really look at the benefits and calibrate it to the storms that we've had before we can, really recommend something. So we've got a long way to go.
Yeah, I think though the feedback from this meeting is important. For example, on concept A, Stephen and James and I can think about how we could change that east corridor to not have that acquisition, right? What else could we do over there on the east side to get the same benefit without having that acquisition? So this has been a really useful, at least my opinion, useful meeting to get the feedback, even though I know we're not making a decision today, and we aren't asking you guys to make a decision today, but this feedback we're getting is valuable.
Hey, Brian, Chris, one more comment I'd say. I certainly think in your report that constructability phasing, because again, if somebody's going to drop $1 billion in, a regional partner's fantastic, we can do everything. But just how we bite an elephant to improve the level of service for folks in Bel Air, knowing that we don't get the full nugget, we get parts of it. How we can do that incrementally to benefit some residents of Bel Air along the way is important. So that way we can at least make decisions on getting something done instead of having to throw our hands up and wait for the federal government or something to come in and try to do this. So again, that may be a concept C issue with the phasing, but just kind of think about that, knowing that's the one of the issues about where the funding is coming from.
Yep, good point.
So I want to, just throw that back out there. James, Stephen, Brian, is there any other feedback or any other consensus that we would need at this point, knowing full well that we have additional information to prepare? Is there anything at all that you all would like to hear from the task force and its members?
No, I don't believe so. I think we've heard really a good conversation. And again, we've got a lot more to do, and we're gonna get back with you for sure.
Okay, well then I will open the floor one last time for any closing comments or questions from the task force at this point. And hearing none, I'm going to get us moving here to public comments. And I have 4 members of the public signed up to speak. And I believe the first person signed up is Ms. Belinda Schmidt. Ms. Schmidt, I see you in the attendees, and I'm going to enable you to speak now. And you'll need to unmute yourself. If you're on a computer, that should be fairly easy. If you're on the phone, there you go. Are you able to hear us okay?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
All right, well, you have the floor.
Thank you. This may not be an agenda item that's appropriate to bring up at this time. and having not ever been part of any of these meetings and knowing your scope, I'm kind of naive going into this, but here's my question and my point, and that is about the impact of putting Bel Air High School, the baseball field at the Maud Gordon Elementary School site, and the removal of 51 mature oak trees that the HISD SUP is requesting because of the impact on flooding, right? Because that's that acreage right now absorbs lots of water, and with a non-permeable baseball field and removal of trees that require a lot of water, what kind of impact might that be? So that's, I don't know if that's within your scope, and it probably is not on your agenda today, but I guess that's my question. Is that within the scope of this body, this task force?
Ms. Schmidt, as I understand it, I think the scope of the task force is a bit more broad and general than the site you mentioned. However, I do know that there will be upcoming opportunities for participation and question. Chavonne, if you might be able to get with Ms. Schmidt on that, and I think that we can certainly work with our city engineer and our staff to try and answer some of your questions, but I don't think the task force itself would have that level of detail on their radar at this point.
I see. Okay, great, thank you.
But definitely we will follow up at the staff level, and we will get any information that you need regarding your question. Chavonne, can you confirm that you can get with Ms. Schmidt on that?
Yes, I do have her information, and I'll make sure that I pass it on to Tracy to make sure that she gets any information or has an opportunity to present comments if she wishes to do such, because that's at the city council level. I also want to kind of say here, in the past, and we're running this meeting the same way, that the public comment period is normally for 3 minutes. And I do have the timer, so I will let the person know when they have 1 minute left, and then when their time is up, the timer will go off.
Okay, thank you. If I could just say, yeah, I am in contact with Tracy Dutton, and I'm aware of the next HISD SUP meeting that's coming up. It was scheduled for July 6th, and it's been delayed. So I'm tapped into that. I was just more trying to rally other support and other bodies that are involved in these decisions, and so it's more of a curiosity of your role and how you might impact it.
Thank you, Ms. Schmidt. And as we mentioned, Chavonne will definitely follow up with you and make sure that we are able to provide anything that would help.
I appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, so next on our list, our very own Council Member Lewis. Council Member Lewis, I believe you might need to unmute yourself. And if you're on a phone and you're having trouble, oh, there you go.
I'm here. I didn't know you would allow me to speak. I really didn't think you were going to allow me to speak.
We have you signed up.
Okay, well, I have a dozen questions, but there's one high-level question that I'd like to put out there. The council on June 15th endorsed the nomination of Charles Goforth to the Texas Water Development Board's Regional Flood Planning Group. And of course, we don't know if he will get that nomination or if he's gotten it yet or not. But have you been discussing your plans with Charles Goforth? He's been working flooding issues for the Brays Bayou Association and with Harris County Flood Control District for years now.
I don't know. I'll defer obviously to James, Stephen, and Brian on some of this. I don't know how active we are with that potential set of partners at this stage. But I know that engaging those bodies, for example, will certainly be part of the next steps. James, Stephen, Brian, anything to add relative to Councilmember Lewis's question?
I just agree with her completely that he needs to be involved in it. We haven't done that at this stage. This is our second presentation, and we've got several more, but we do want to engage the Braised Bayou Association. They're going to be thoroughly vetted with their ideas and for that matter, detention options too.
Yes.
And I have worked with Charles in the past talking about tunnel solutions as it relates to Braised Bayou, but not, as Stephen and James noted, not specifically on this project yet. So he's a friend, but we're happy to
Who is
engage him.
speaking? Who is
This is
speaking?
Brian Gettinger, Friesen Nichols. Sorry,
Okay.
didn't identify myself.
Okay. Okay, well, I would say the presentation started off very well, realizing that Bel Air is a very small area of the Braised Bayou Basin alone, not to mention the larger regional basin. But just that it's so myopic, this plan is so myopic, but it's so much bigger than this. Geologically, the water should go down the bayou. There are big detention projects going on with the bayou. Harris County Flood Control District is doing a good job, and I'm just amazed. Thank you.
Hey, what are you doing? What are you doing?
Thank you, Councilmember Lewis. We appreciate it. Was that all that you had?
That's it.
Okay. So the next speaker that we have signed up is Mr. David Schlossberg, and I thought I saw him earlier. I don't see him logged in now. So at this point, I will recognize former Councilmember Pat McLaughlin. Former Councilmember McLaughlin, is that you? And are you able to speak at this point?
Well, I don't know.
Yes, you are.
I'm a virgin at this Zoom stuff. Can you hear me?
I certainly can, loud and clear.
Well, listen, I want to tell you that this telephonic meeting stuff is great because we can sit here and do our civic duty and have our cocktails at the same time. So anyway, some comments on this. I've followed flood situations for quite some time, and being a registered professional engineer, I've got a serious interest in it. And I subscribe to a engineering method called root cause analysis. And I've been thinking and doing some studying to determine what is really our root cause of flooding in Bel Air. Now, don't tell me too much rain or something like that, but there is a very legitimate root cause of flooding, and that is we are unable to discharge our floodwaters rapidly. We're limited in our ability to discharge our floodwaters, and that is the root cause of flooding. And my suggestion is that we spend a little bit more time looking at Cypress Ditch as far as allowing Cypress Ditch to be a receiver of water. The water discharge problem is a problem of not being able to direct our water. If we had a waterfall, unfortunately, we don't have a waterfall in Bel Air, but waterfalls are the ultimate way to discharge water. Unfortunately, in our Cypress Ditch operation, when that ditch is full, our lateral drains from the city, our north-south drains, empty into the lower section of Cypress Ditch, and that causes a significant, very significant reduction in flow. That is, we're not able to adequately flow our water into Cypress Ditch. Now, my proposed solution for that is to expand Cypress Ditch considerably. install, develop a retention basin over there on,
You have 1 more minute, sir.
okay, on Beech Nut, near where the police station was. And then also along the railroad track. That's great. Now, just option C has some real potential. I'm very unimpressed by the tunnel. I don't think that tunnel is functional. Tunnels don't work well for drainage in flat areas. And item B has many complexities with it too that I can discuss with y'all at a later date. But I think that the presentations were valuable and I appreciate being a part of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. We appreciate your contribution. I am going back and taking a look. I still do not see Mr. Schlossberg back. So
I can, he did email in what he wanted to say, so I can fill in the task force. His concern was about the elevation grants, that it seems to be taking a long time for us to get funding, whether it be through the annual grant that we apply for or through the HMGP grant. And so he was saying that what if the city of Bel Air took some dollars out to have some type of matching program, that we created our own to help the residents of Bel Air that needed assistance with elevating their homes.
thank you, Chavonne. And would you be able to forward that to the task force? And I also believe that we had one other written comment submission from Mr. Dan Sebesta that we could forward as well.
I forwarded that before the meeting so that they could have that information.
Perfect.
And yes, I will get with and I'm sorry, his name is escaping my mind right now.
Mr.
And
Schlossberg?
thank you very much. And make sure that if he didn't want to add anything else, since he was not able to talk tonight, and forward that on.
Okay, thank you very much. And at this point, I will defer back to the task force and its members for any final comments or items to bring forward. Hearing none, we will move on to the last item on the agenda, which is adjournment. I want to thank everyone, both the attendees and participants from the public, as well as the task force members, the liaisons, the members of the public that tuned in, and city staff that assisted. So thank you once again, and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Good night, everyone.